Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story that, on the surface, is about a celebration, but when you scratch beneath that surface, it reveals a much deeper issue about government duty, timing, and the real-world impact on people's lives.
So picture this. It's November 2025, and the government of Meghalaya makes a big announcement. They're releasing a massive sum, 130 crore rupees for student scholarships.
And this wasn't just some abstract number in a budget. This money was meant for nearly 71,000 scheduled tribe students all across the state. That's a huge number of young people whose education really depends on this kind of support.
As you can imagine, officials were quick to praise the move. The education minister called it a red-letter day, a landmark achievement. And, on the face of it, it looks like a clear win. But, and this is a big but, the timing of this celebration is everything. Here's where the whole story starts to get a lot more complicated. You see, this big celebration, it wasn't for an early payment, or even an on-time one. It was for a payment that was already seriously late.
Okay, so just take a look at this timeline. The academic year kicks off way back in June or July. That's when college fees are due. Then boom, August hits, and hostel fees are on the table. But the scholarship money? That doesn't actually show up until November. We're talking a full 5 months late.
The source material we're drawing from uses this great quote from Benjamin Franklin to set the scene. It basically suggests that we should be pretty critical of the excuses that were given for this delay. So, with that in mind, let's do exactly that.
All right, let's get into the anatomy of this delay. What exactly was the official story for this 5-month wait?
Well, the government's main reason was, hey, the central funds haven't come through yet. They kind of painted this picture of the state nobly stepping in to save the day with its own money. But the reality is, this has always been a centrally sponsored scheme. That 90-10 funding split, it's been the rule for a long time. It wasn't some kind of shock.
And this chart really breaks it down for you. 90% of the funding comes from the union government and 10% from the state. That's just how it works for these schemes in the northeastern states. So that 10% from the state isn't some heroic last-minute rescue, it's their standard, predictable responsibility.
Then they came up with another claim. They said they had to work out a new mechanism because the rules supposedly didn't allow for advance fund transfers. But that just begs the question, right? If you knew the rules were a hurdle, why on earth wouldn't you sort that mechanism out before the school year even started? It just doesn't quite add up.
And here's the kicker. Other states with similar systems were not having this problem. Look at Nagaland. They started getting money out the door in June. Other states like Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Tripura all figured out priority systems to get funds to students early. So the argument that it simply couldn't be done, well, it kind of falls apart when you see other states were already doing it.
And this is so important to remember. This whole thing isn't just about spreadsheets and administrative timelines. The real story here is the human cost, the price that actual students and their families had to pay because of this delay.
To really understand what this means, the source tells the story of one student, a young woman from Tarshra who got into a professional course. Let's step away from the big numbers for a second and look at her specific situation.
So her hostel fees were due back in August, but with no scholarship money in hand, what could her family possibly do? They were forced to sell their winter paddy stock, their livelihood really, at a very bad price, just to make sure she could stay in school. And that's the whole point. This happened all because a right, and that's the key word here, a right, not a charity handout, arrived 5 months late. This isn't just some minor inconvenience. For families like hers, it can mean taking on debt, it means serious financial hardship, it's a real crisis.
Okay, so as you've probably guessed by now, this isn't just a one-off story about Meghalaya. The author argues this is actually a symptom of a much bigger, systemic problem in how governance often works in India.
So why do these delays keep happening? Well, this table from the source lays out a pretty cynical but powerful set of arguments. First, political visibility. If you delay things, you create a crisis. Then, when you finally release the funds, you get to be the hero and have a big photo op. Second, it gives you fiscal flexibility. Money that's allocated but not yet spent can make the budget look better, even if it's just temporary. And finally, there's a psychological element. It turns an entitlement into a gift, making people feel grateful for something they were owed all along. And here's the real irony in all of this. The National Scholarship Portal, a digital system that was supposed to make everything faster and more efficient, has actually become part of the problem. Technical requirements like mandatory Aadhaar bank linkage have locked out thousands of students, almost 8,000 in Meghalaya alone. On top of that, the portal's technology is so rigid it can't even process partial payments. It's all or nothing.
But, it's easy to point out all the problems. What's much harder is figuring out solutions. And the source material we're looking at doesn't just stop at criticism. It lays out a really clear 6-point plan for how we can actually fix this. So, what's the path forward? The proposal has 6 concrete steps. First, create actual legal timelines with penalties for being late. Second, set up a state scholarship advance fund so the state can pay on time no matter what. Third, just simplify the ridiculously complex verification process. Fourth, create a student hardship redressal cell for emergency situations. Fifth, make all the scholarship data public and transparent. And finally, bring students to the table with participatory oversight. It's all about accountability and proactive planning.
And it all comes back to another one of Benjamin Franklin's quotes. Well done is better than well said. It perfectly sums it up, doesn't it? Actions speak so much louder than grand announcements and press conferences. Which brings us right back to the core idea of this whole explainer, the manufactured triumph. So what is it exactly? Well, it's this practice of taking a basic duty, doing it really late, and then repackaging that action as some grand political achievement. It cleverly shifts the focus away from the initial failure and onto the eventual, heavily publicized resolution.
And that leaves us with a pretty tough question to think about. When a right is delayed and a big celebration follows, who is really paying the price for that photo op? What's the true cost when a government's most basic duty is performed for the cameras months after it was truly, desperately needed?